name is Dr. Pam Rutledge. I'm faculty in the media psychology programs at Fielding. And just to give you a little context, we actually have 3 media psychology programs. We have a PhD or doctoral program. We have a master's program and 2 certificate programs. One that focuses on brand psychology and audience engagement, and the other on consumer neuroscience. And the reason I tell you that is that the students that are joining me today, Holly Collins and Scott Garner, are both in the doctoral program. And we're working together on a research project, which we can talk about later, but I was able to sort of strong arm them into joining me today to let you find out what it's like to actually be a student here at Fielding. So I'm gonna throw in some questions, but Ignacio's here monitoring the chat. So if you have a question that's on your mind and we don't get to it, please just chat it into the box and we will talk about it. So let me start, Scott, with you and tell us a little bit about your background and why media psychology was appealing to you.
Sure. So I came straight from the professional world of media, working in both children's television. I worked at all of the major kids' TV networks. And then in the late aughts, I segued into women's entertainment. Working at Lifetime, and then most recently working for the Oprah Winfrey Network. And I was always, I have my master's from, I don't even want to say, way too long ago. And I was always had the intention of going and of continuing and getting my PhD, but life just seemed to always get in the way. And so I started, I guess around 2017, 2018, I started to explore how might this work. And I did a number of different, open houses and studied and took the GRE again, because my scores were so old, they weren't counted. And ultimately, I landed on Fielding because of the flexibility that it offered me to continue to be able to professionally work in media, but it actually offered me, the ability to fulfill my goal of getting a PhD. So, and I'm, currently through all of my coursework, and I've just started to work on dissertation, but I've also, as you mentioned earlier, been working on research projects with you and with Holly, as well as with one of the faculty members from the clinical program, specifically studying LGBTQIA issues, as well as anti-racism issues. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Awesome. It seems like only yesterday that I saw you at one of our national sessions as a prospective student when we were talking about positive psychology and user experience. So it's so cool. I mean, I've been privileged to be able to work with you quite a bit, and so I really like that. Holly, I love your story. So give us an update where you are, where you've been.
So I actually have a background I started off my career in broadcast marketing. But then as my career progressed through, I really developed an interest in clinical psychology. So I selected Fielding because also the flexibility, and because I am a military spouse. And so selecting a program was not as easy as it might be for somebody who lives near a school or can move to a school. And so I started in the clinical psychology program here at Fielding and loved it, but found myself migrating toward the interaction between human psychology and media in a lot of what I was looking at, papers, everything that I was interested in. And then when I had a life-changing event, I had to sort of restructure what I was doing. And it was a natural fit for me to transition into the media psychology program so that I could apply that love of human psychology with the media interface interaction.
That's great. And I love how, I mean, I don't think we think about it very much, the position that you're in as a military spouse, but it's also true for people that have jobs where there's lots of travel involved. It's very difficult to pick a PhD program where they expect you to show up. I mean, I was facing those same constraints when I decided, I had little kids at home. There was no way I could drive an hour and a half to the closest university, and fielding was such a wonderful solution to that, and I know, Scott, you were contemplating going to a brick and mortar, and, lucky us that you got a job offer in LA and drug you back west. So let me ask you guys, given that you have sort of strong backgrounds, how has that affected what you've chosen to do or what you've been open to doing in the program? Has the program sort of opened doors for you, or if it's allowed you to focus? How would you describe what you're doing? Scott, why don't you start?
So it's interesting for me because my master's that I had before I came to fielding was in communication, but it had a very strong developmental psychology element to it. So, but I had never formally majored or studied psychology. I was a little bit apprehensive, but what I liked about what I saw at fielding was not only the psychology interfacing with new technology, but also the focus was still on, it just offered a plethora of new media as well as traditional media. And, it's not the primary focus, but it has definitely changed, at least because I work in market research for a network for Oprah, and it has been for me, it's been very additive to the experience, because typically with market research, you just do brand awareness and tracking, or you do focus groups to answer a particular question for either programming or marketing. This has actually been a great program for me because it's opened my eyes to being able to think about, as Holly mentioned, that human element and sort of step outside myself in terms of knowing that I am not, and nor anyone at the network is not the audience. And so one of my biggest, successes has been at work, has been actually putting together something that I picked up in one of your courses at fielding, which was putting together a persona project. And so being able to help educate the folks at the network to, sort of sit in someone else's shoes and understand that one size does not fit all, and that we're all driven by needs and goals, and that we need to approach the audience from a more three-dimensional standpoint as opposed to a lump sum of, specific demographics.
Yeah, I love that about media psychology, that we get to, we learn all this theory, which, there's new media and old media, there's old theory and there's new theory. So, we use the whole bucket, but we get to immediately take it out into the world. And I think that's been the most profound thing for me about the audience engagement and brand storytelling, is that people report back, just even during the class, I use this at work. It changed our product line. It changed how we deal with the guys on the shop floor. Some really cool stuff. What about you, Holly? I know you've sort of had, the clinical thing and then the marketing thing. How has the media program changed what you're thinking about, or how have you been thinking about the media program?
So I actually would echo a lot of what Scott said. My marketing experience prior to the program, I feel like everybody focused on, like, we have this product, how are we going to sell it? And that was just more the line of thinking. Whereas in the media program, you really switch perspectives, and you start to understand the audiences have all of these needs that they are trying to have met, whether they realize it or not. And the way you successfully market something, the way you reach them, is tapping into those needs and meeting them where they are, not what you want them to do or think. And I feel like that has been eye-opening for me. On the other, additionally, like with my psychology background, the media program has been really useful in understanding the level of design behind what we consume in the media that is designed to motivate us or catch our attention or really get into our mind. And it's changed my way of interacting with media and understanding how it impacts individuals, people.
That's an interesting point that you make, because that's sort of something that I've been for the longest time on the network side of traditional TV. We use the phrase entertain and engage. And one of the shifts that I have made is more about consumption and process, or consume and process. And, it definitely does, at least my internal clients have a very different perspective, because they're not just using sort of buzzword jargon, and at the same time they don't necessarily feel like I'm being overly academic or scholarly, but it does challenge them to sort of reconcile some of their stereotypes or beliefs, and think about things in a different way. So I totally agree with you, Holly.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. So for people watching who don't know, we have what we call a distributed model, which means that most of our work is done asynchronously on forums or discussion boards. However, we do hold sessions regionally a few times a year where we all get together to meet in person for seminars. There is a requirement for the doctoral students to show up at a certain amount of these. It's a pretty low hurdle and pretty easy to accomplish in the amount of time you're doing the program. However, if there is no requirement for master's and certificate students, but they are always invited to join us whenever we're meeting in person. I just want to give people a little bit of context about that, because the next question I'm going to ask you guys is, what's it like to be a student here? So Holly, we'll go back to you on this one, because Scott doesn't always get to go first.
So I actually really enjoy being a student at Fielding. I think I really like, so anytime you enter into a program, you're dedicating a set amount of time, and a PhD program takes a lot of time, but it really does give you the flexibility to stay engaged with your program and progress and do the things that you need to do while still having, like, maintaining other aspects of your life. I'm a mom of 2 boys, and my schedule is crazy with them, and sports and activities and school. And so it's nice that I can be there for them and also pursue goals for me and succeed in them. And so I really like the structure. I will also say that I've attended various schools in my life, and Fielding has had the most engaged faculty that I've ever experienced. I would say that all of my classes that I have always been really eye-opening, interesting, fascinating, and the professors are so excited to talk about the subject beyond just what they're teaching, and they really have a passion for it. So I've genuinely enjoyed my experience at Fielding as a student.
Awesome. Scott, tell us what your experience is being here.
So my experience, I mean, it was interesting because the first introduction that I had with Fielding was when I came to one of the national sessions. It was actually in January, I think, of 2019. And what I was most impressed about was the level of camaraderie amongst the students in the program with the faculty, and the level of engagement and the sort of specificity around topics. And I was curious, like, well, how is that going to translate into some of the asynchronous work that is being done? But what I've found is that, a lot of times people virtually, and especially now coming out, on the end of the pandemic, hopefully, is that, there's a strong degree of camaraderie among peers in a class in terms of being able to share ideas or bounce things off of. But very similar to what Holly was saying, the level of engagement that I have had with the faculty has been par excellence. I mean, I feel like, unlike some of the other schools that I have been at, I am not necessarily being force-fed any of the faculty's sort of passion areas. they're very engaged in the topic that they're teaching, and allow you to think very broadly about how you might be able to apply it into your own work, or maybe areas of study that you're interested in. But there's a definite degree of freedom that I have in that. And I always pick something up, and working with the other students. Similarly, some of the classes require sort of mandatory weekly Zooms, and that's great because you get to know each other, and then you come together at either the winter session in January or the summer session in July, and you get to actually sit down, have coffee, have lunch, have breakfast, and it's great. I've made a number of friends across my coursework at Fielding, and a lot of the faculty have just been extremely giving of their time in terms of asking questions, hopping on a Zoom to clarify maybe an assignment. So it's just been very rewarding in that respect.
To piggyback on that, I just wanted to say also that I fully agree with Scott. And when I first started, I was a little worried about the distributed learning model, because with the distance piece, I wasn't sure if I was going to really connect with my peers and professors and get to know people. And it is amazing how tight you become with your cohort and your peers and the people you work with, to a point where when you see them at the sessions, winter session or summer session, it's like you're seeing and having a reunion with a lifelong friend. And the power of that emotion is really it's really engaging, and not something that I expected, but makes the fielding experience very special.
Yeah, I really agree with you, Holly. And for people who don't know, every class that you take at Fielding is designed by the faculty member who teaches it. This is not done by an instructional designer and handed off to a TA. If you're taking a class from me, you're taking a class from me, for better or for worse, good news, bad news, right? But the other thing is that it is also, there's small classes. These classes are capped at 12, even though they're asynchronous. So your image of, this sort of online university is completely wrong when it comes to Fielding. And so what I always tell students is, yeah, we may be, asynchronous, but I guarantee you within 2 posts, I will know your voice, and I will know, sort of how you're thinking. And then I'm going to know if you're going to do a good job or a bad job, because I've already gotten to know the way you think. But it's remarkable how well you get to know people using these kinds of virtual connections. And obviously we're lucky to have video conferencing, but another faculty member, Dr. Hogg, and I meet regularly every Wednesday, rain or shine, all year round. And if we are grading papers together, great. Otherwise, we're just sort of, whining about the things in our lives. But that connection, we're 3,000 miles apart, and she's one of my best friends because of that, not because of the time we spend over coffee, but the time we spend Zooming, for lack of a better verb. So now that we've sung all the virtues of Fielding, which I think there are many, what have been the challenges for you, Scott?
Well, because it's sort of a self-guided program, I would say the initial challenge coming into the program was figuring out what the cadence was going to be in terms of the number of hours a week, things I needed to devote to specific classes, or the number of classes I was going to take in a particular term. And I started taking 3 classes, and I did that for a couple of terms. And then, I kind of feel like I got my rhythm, I would say about 6 months into the program, in terms of knowing how much is too much. And the good thing is when, we register, we kind of have the ability to look at, past syllabi for the different courses. So it helps you kind of judge, like, how much are you going to need to dedicate? Because I kind of bank my hours specific to school. So like Mondays and Fridays are my full-time school days. And then I work half days on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but I usually am working all weekend because that's just the nature of a PhD program. That was like kind of one of the biggest challenges, I think, and that sort of subsided as time went on. And it was about getting to know both what the expectations were from the professor, as well as your own personal expectations that you put on yourself. And so,
Well, I think, yeah, you have very high standards for yourself, let me just say. So I hesitate to ask you how many hours per week per class you spend, because I know you, but
I have a very good formula for that.
of course you do.
A standard class, non-methods or statistics-based class is about 12 hours a week. Once you're in the statistics class, I would say it's anywhere from 15 to 20. So I would recommend not taking more than one additional class when you're taking methods, because it is very time consuming. Not only are you learning the concepts, but you're also running a bunch of different statistical tests and SPSS, and then you're actually learning how to produce it. So it was the most time consuming sequence of classes that I have taken at Fielding.
And what about you, Holly? What have been the challenges for you?
The challenges for me probably have been making sure to appropriately balance the demands for my time, from my kids, my husband, and the demands of school, and then the demand, like carving out enough space for me and what I need. It's very easy to get pulled in different directions, and you have to really determine that you create nice boundaries for your time. But once you get into a groove, then it is a lot easier, and once people adjust to that. But I think definitely the kids try to pull more of my time than I would prefer, but
Well, yeah, it goes fast too. I always say you'll never wish you hugged a kid more, right?
I know, it does.
It's I mean, I think that change making those demands, it is hard. And I think one of the challenges of a distributed model in particular is that you're on a computer, and then you're having this experience that's like essentially virtual, and then you close it up and nobody in your world knows what you're doing. So it's often hard to get them to understand, yes, I have schoolwork, or yes, I have something, when they haven't seen any evidence of you even going anywhere, much less, seeing any of your classmates or anything. So I always found that to be sort of challenging. At the risk of sounding a little touchy-feely, although we are psychologists, for me, media psychology was a really profound shift in how I viewed the world. And I was just wondering whether you guys feel that it's changed the way you think about things or approach problems. That was a little bit of a setup there, but feel free to say no. So Scott, can you?
Like I said, it's definitely sort of reoriented my brain in terms of thinking about, like I mentioned earlier, needs versus goals in terms of the way I deal with things at work. But I think observationally, just, having lived through the pandemic over the last year, done all of my work virtually, seeing sort of the issues around race in America, it's given me a newfound perspective, because so much of what we learn in both, some of the social psychology classes, as well as the history and systems, we see this like cycle. And so it's very interesting for me to be able to thread together sort of the more scholarly things that I'm working on with actually things that are going on with my life, whether it be at work or, just sort of, as I said, observationally from my house.
And what about you, Holly?
I think for me, I've developed a deeper appreciation for how our brain functions, how we function in the world. I don't think when I started this program, I would have given, I wouldn't have given stories as much of a major place in our functioning, but learning all about the power of storytelling and narrative in the way we think and in the way we process the world. Like, to me, that was very powerful, because now I when I am wanting to make an impact, if I'm wanting to reach somebody, understanding that telling it in a story method, they may retain the information more. It may touch them in a deeper way cognitively. And so to me, that has been really powerful. And just seeing how just the whole approach of psychology and media, and that connection it's definitely widened my understanding of how we function in our world, because media is everywhere. Right. We can't get away from it, and it influences us constantly from like the youngest of ages, to the end of our lives. So.
And, we heard a little bit about Scott's schedule, but I'm curious, Holly, what are your strategies for, when they work, balancing kids and school and, other family demands and all the stuff that's going on?
Well, so during the school year, when the kids are at school, I try very hard to dedicate like set amounts of time to school, because I know when they're home or after school, there are activities and there are things that I have to do. And because of my husband's job in the military, there's a lot of spouse support that's sort of expected. And so I know that oftentimes there are set times during the weekend or after, I don't know, like towards the end of the day that I am needed by him. So my main hours are when the kids are at school. Now, summer has been a little bit more challenging, but they know that when I'm sitting at my computer during these times, then they can ask me stuff if they need to, and I'll help them with food. But there are times when I'm working on papers and projects, and they need to let me do that. So.
Sounds like you have trained your boys well.
Yeah. Trying.
But I think one thing that is nice about fielding is that you don't have to take 2 or 3 classes every term. You're able to, decide when you can handle a load and when you need to go light. I know another colleague of ours who's a student, Jay, purposefully schedules light in the summer because his kids are out. And so you really do have that choice without getting behind, or however you want to talk about that.
And that's exactly what I did. I only took 1 course over the summer. So not only could I, not only did I know that they would have more demands on my time, but also I wanted to be able to engage with them and do fun things with them. So I love the fact that I can take heavier loads during the school year and then the lighter loads in the summer, and it's, that's acceptable. That's totally fine.
Right.
I also love the fact that it's a year-round program, because I think not having the full lull of a brick and mortar school, which would take the summer off, it keeps my mind engaged in terms of always being able to, add new things to my sort of repertoire.
I think you're right. I think it sort of keeps you sort of thinking and active. So it's not like, well, I'm going to work on my dissertation in 2 months. It's like you're always sort of have that at the back of your mind and you're sort of working towards it, which I think is really helpful. I thought, one of the reasons that the 3 of us know each other so well is that we're working on a research project. And it goes back sort of to Holly, to your point about self-care. How do you do self-care? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, I bought myself a Peloton bike. And then I found out that Scott had a Peloton bike, or it might have been because of Scott that I bought one. I'm not sure. I blame you for my husband, but whatever. And then, so we now with another faculty member meet every Friday on the Peloton bike and ride, and Holly's going to join us this Friday. But that whole experience, was really fun, but it got us thinking about the interface of Peloton and the way Peloton engages in that kind of camaraderie and community. So we've been working on developing some sort of research questions and surveys to examine these various aspects of it. And I'd love to hear you talk about what that's like doing virtual research and what this project is like for you. Scott, why don't you start?
Well, I was very interested in this because in one of the classes I took very early on at Fielding, I was already an avid indoor cycling proponent, and I was doing a program called Flywheel, and I had done Soul Cycle a couple of times, and I liked the fact that they had this motivational element. And then when the pandemic hit, I was just like, okay, I'm not going to the gym anytime soon. So I bought the Peloton. And I'm very fascinated by the interface in the sense that there is the sense of community. You get very similar, sort of aspirational messages, as well as sort of, positive feedback throughout the classes. I have not taken the live classes, I have to confess. I do most of that asynchronous, just like my Fielding experience. I will, once I hit my, whatever 200, 500 milestone of rides, I will take a live class, because if you take the live class, they call you out, and it's a very interesting, interesting sort of dynamic. But I am very curious, especially since Peloton's stock skyrocketed very much like Zoom's during the pandemic, to see what happens now. Are these just going to become, equipment that sits in somebody's garage for years, or is this sort of, have they crossed over and this is going to become sort of the new thing? Because the membership for Peloton is very affordable when you compare it to a regular indoor cycling experience. And it's great because I'm able to, as you mentioned, I'm able to ride with people all over the country, if not world. I've done a ride with a friend of mine who lives in London, and so
Nice.
there's this. So it's been fascinating to sort of explore kind of what are the different measures that we might be able to evaluate. And there's always more measures and more questions that you want to ask, but it's been very fulfilling in the sense of trying to winnow it down and figure out sort of like what are our 2 or 3 key research questions, and how do we apply the psychology to that media interface or exercise experience.
Yeah, and I thought, Holly, you brought forward a really good article that was sort of a nice frame for how to approach this, looking at the sort of mental health aspect of Peloton. So talk about that a little bit.
Oh, well, so we were looking at some of the foundational research and theories that support that support all of our Peloton research. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was how it meets various needs that we have. And during the pandemic, we were isolated and we were not able to exercise and, out in gym and with other people. And the Peloton experience really brought you together and met that social need, and it met that sense of personal autonomy, personal accomplishment, maybe motivation, and that in my mind, really helps our mental health and our sense of well-being. So like, I mean, that was some of what I was interested in our research. I also really thought that the gamification and persuasive technology that is woven in the Peloton media experience is fascinating. And so I like how they've applied it to help motivate us and help us feel better and motivated to continue and accomplish more.
Yeah, I mean, that's been fascinating to me too, all of the structural affordances that dictate various kinds of behavior. But I also thought it was interesting that you shared an article where someone had said, I fired my therapist because I've got a Peloton bike. And, that somehow that this Peloton experience had been really transformative especially over the social isolation period. So I think that's a really interesting avenue to try and take this research. And so in case any of you out there wondering, how do you do research when Holly's in Virginia and Scott's in Palm Springs, where it's lovely and warm. And I'm having June gloom along the coast in California. How do we do that? And we do it by scheduling Zoom meetings, and we meet together, once a week, and we sort of advance the project along. Right now, we're working, as Scott said, on figuring out what are the questions and how do we measure these things, and what is it that we really want, because I'm pretty sure no one will answer a questionnaire with 340 questions on it. So we're trying to hone down our enthusiasm and passion to get this done. But Scott, I'd also like to have you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with Kanji, because I think that's just fascinating.
Yeah, so Dr. Page is a professor in the clinical program. And when I first came to Fielding, I was recommended to take the history and systems classes. And so Dr. Page was teaching that class. I had a fantastic experience. While the Fielding syllabus is pretty consistent, course to course, Dr. Page, who had also, she was brand new to Fielding, the same term that I started. Her background is in basically marginalized populations. So she basically added some literature that I probably would not have gotten exposed to in other classes, in terms of understanding sort of areas of intersectionality, and areas of around specific marginalized groups such as the LGBTQ groups. And so it brought an interesting perspective. And then I took the social basis classes from her. And after I finished that particular term, she asked me if I would come on board and sort of be her research assistant on something that she was working on with the APA, which was developing an LGBTQ psychology curriculum for high school students. And so I started working on that, and one thing has segued into the next. And so it's interesting because she comes to the table with a very, she's a very great, social psychologist and clinical psychologist, but everything that we've been doing has had an element of media in it, in terms of the curriculum that we were working on with APA. We were trying to develop a media interface for that, and the stuff that we're doing on anti-racism, we're also trying to figure out, like, how can that be developed into a training program that, people that teach these kinds of courses on diversity, equity, and inclusion can use and access, and not just like rely on having to do random YouTube searches on sort of these topics. So it's been, she's been really a very big influence on me at Fielding, and it's been great to be able to obviously work very closely with the faculty that are in the media psychology, but also work across the School of Psychology at large, and understand some of those aspects.
Well, I'm grateful for that, because it's allowed me to get to know Dr. Page a little bit better. And I might not have crossed paths with her as early as I did if it were it not for you. So I'm happy. I'm happy on several accounts about that. So here's a question for you guys, right? We all get the what is media psychology question, right? And we get it so often, I don't even know if it's worth trying to explain how you explain it. But there's a follow-on question that we get all the time. It's like, media psychology, what are you going to do with that? And so I'd like to know, Scott, what are you going to do with that?
Well, I mean, I get the what is media psychology question quite a bit. And, I explain to them that it's the human experience meeting technology, and technology can be anything from listening to the radio, working on or reading something on your iPad, to, sort of a VR experience that you might attend, at some place. In terms of what I am going to do with that, I'm going to continue to consult and probably mostly in the more research oriented space. I feel like I said earlier, this program has broadened sort of my ability to bring more components to the table of not just pure market research, but actually thinking at a deeper level, and tying in sort of as Holly was saying, sort of those needs and goals, as well as thinking more about things from a cognitive and affective standpoint. So that is kind of my primary goal. Very similarly, I sit on the board of my undergraduate institution, and I've done a lot of guest lectures. And one of the classes that I took last year at Fielding was about designing an online curriculum. And so I'm working with them once I finish my PhD to develop a curriculum that is taught virtually. The school's located in Atlanta. I'm here in Southern California. And we have been talking about, is there some kind of a summer program that we could put together? And so the experience at Fielding has given me that ability. So I probably will do some adjunct teaching as well as consulting. That's how I'm planning to use my PhD.
Awesome. Well, and I loved your example earlier of being able to take what we did in the audience engagement class and bring that over to the Oprah Winfrey Network and really shift the way they're doing market segmentation. And it sounds like it's been extraordinarily successful with everyone but the marketing department.
Exactly. No, that was a fun project because I was able to take all of the learning from that particular course on brand psychology and audience engagement, and then bring it to the table, because in the past, from a market research perspective, they just did a very big quantitative segmentation study. And those segmentation studies were very shallow in terms of the depth of the information. They really didn't offer much beyond sort of demographics and a few psychographic questions, but actually doing a persona-based approach and doing it more qualitatively allowed us to get a greater depth and to show the nuances. And yeah, I think it's interesting because the marketing department should be the one that actually responds the most to it. They just like to kick the tires, I think, and sort of understand, like, well, how is this different? And you know, it's very much like you just have to re-educate people to retrain their brain.
You have to re-educate them about media psychology too. Okay, so Holly, I know we've had conversations about this recently because you're kind of a goal-oriented person. You know, what are you going to do? How do you see yourself in, you know, after you're on the other side of the PhD or in 5 years' time? And I'm going to just qualify this, that Scott is really focused, right? And God, I should have his kind of focus, but I came into, you know, this PhD program without a clear direction of where I was going. And so it really has, for me, sort of unfolded as I went along. And to your point, Scott, even though you think of research as like some guy with a microscope or something, or somebody sitting and, you know, just looking at numbers and numbers, but research is such an interesting and interactive and vital thing to be doing. I mean, the consulting I've done on audiences for entertainment properties is really getting to know the audience. It isn't, you know, I mean, it's not as, research sounds so cold, and I find it really dynamic and exciting when you can apply psychology because you're looking for why. And I asked you a question, Holly, and then I just kept right on talking. So it's your turn now.
So honestly, I started my PhD journey on a different path, and I had the goal of being a neuropsychologist, and I was in it, and I loved it, and I saw where I was going. But sometimes life throws you curveballs, and you roll with it. And I have been so blessed to find myself in the media psychology department program, because everything that we are learning, it impacts us so much. Like all of the theories and just how we see the world and how we work with the media around us is huge. And so I personally am putting it together, like my post PhD plan together. I have a lot of things that I'm interested in, but I don't know what I'm going to do with this at the very end. But I do know that I love this topic. I love this area of research and study, and I'm really excited to apply it. And the thing that makes me, it bothers me a little bit that I don't know exactly what I'm going to do at the end of this program. But what makes me feel comforted and excited is that media is everywhere, And so there's always going to be an application. I am trying to be creative and think about what I like and what I want and how can I apply it to that. And so it's a work in progress.
I think, Pam, going back to one of the things that you said earlier, because you said, oh, Scott, you're so focused. I actually came into the program with sort of a different idea of what I was going to study. I was very fascinated coming into the program and how the content landscape had changed from a more what I would call traditional linear model, where you watch shows that are programmed on the network for you, versus the streaming model where you have the ability to binge watch. And I was very interested coming into the program about like, how does binge watching a show versus watching something linearly impact sort of the cognitive abilities of memory. Like, for instance, if you watch a show over the weekend, watch all 12 episodes, do people have different takeaways than if they watch it over a 12-week period? So that was where I started, and where I ended up is actually after doing the persona project for my company. I started thinking like, what other data sets might exist at my company, and I realized, oh wow, I'm sitting on a data set of the Oprah Winfrey Show, which aired from 1986 to 2011. So there's like 4,561 episodes. There's ratings attached, there's keywords, there's themes, there's a ton of information. And so I went back to my boss and I said, hey, this won't cost you anything. I'm not charging you for it, but would you guys give me legal access to use this database to be able to apply psychology, and specifically looking in the areas of sort of that social good or positive psychology of how did those episodes resonate with people 10 years after the fact. So I still have the element of, you know, what I have with binge watching in terms of memory retention, but I'm adding the element of affect and understanding what does that journey look like for the consumer 10 years after the show has gone off air. Not that she's off air. I mean, she still, you know, does big interviews with like Harry and Meghan. She still, you know, tweets and posts on Instagram and involved with a number of other sort of organizations. But I wouldn't say, I would say that's been the beauty of fielding, is I came in thinking I wanted to do one thing. And while it still is definitely of interest to me, it opened doors to things that I had not thought about.
Yeah, you know, and I was thinking that what we're doing with Peloton and the kind of things that we're thinking about in terms of impact might be interesting to sort of circle back and look at streaming. And, you know, I hate to call it binge watching because that's such a pejorative. And I think somebody at the industry invented that because having people be in charge of their own washing doesn't seem to me to be a bad thing. You know, nobody tells me how many books I can read or in an order either. So, but I think there's some really interesting questions that we could revisit some of that stuff with, especially in the context of COVID. That might be kind of fun. Before we sort of launch in and I ask these guys to give prospects advice, are there any questions out there, Ignacio, that we should know about?
As of right now, we don't have any questions in the chat box, but
Okay.
for those of you who are attending, if you want to pose some questions to our panelists here, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll address them in the order they come in.
And anybody else have any questions that you'd like to ask? Erica, is there anything that we should be addressing that you get asked all the time?
You know, I think you're really hitting a lot of it. You've done such a wonderful job speaking to the culture and the community, which is as admissions people, probably one of our biggest things that we really tried to do, but you just so eloquently and authentically express that. So I thank you. I guess the only other thing that I'm thinking about that we haven't talked about, it might be interesting to hear, is any of your experiences, if either one of you have participated in some of the non-session events. I know like Digital Hollywood, and there's some other things that that our students have participated in. Just curious if you've had any experience with those, or Pam, if you want to speak to those at all.
Sure. COVID's been going on for so long, I can't even remember who's been where. Digital Hollywood is a media conference in Los Angeles. We generally try as the media psychology faculty to have some amount of us at some major conferences whenever possible. And when we do that, we usually gather students together and try and form a panel or get people's posters presented, their research put out. But I don't know that I was at Digital Hollywood overlapping you, Scott. Were you there?
We were there together. Yeah,
Oh.
Digital Hollywood was one of my first industry, sort of media psychology industry panels. Because I live in LA as well, I knew about it for a number of years. I was very curious to see sort of the media psychology aspect being applied, because I typically would go to, some of the stuff that streamers were doing, or some of the sort of stuff that the virtual reality folks were doing. And so to be able to see some of the media psychology panels was very helpful. I was also set to go to South by Southwest last year, right as the pandemic hit. So that didn't materialize, but there's a couple of conferences that are coming up in the next calendar year. Like my work with Dr. Page, we're going to the multicultural psychology to present some of the work that we've been doing on LGBTQ and anti-racism. So we're going to probably do some kind of a roundtable or symposium or a poster at that. And then there's an ICA, International Communication Association panel that's in Paris next year that I'm hoping to take some of the research that I've done at Fielding to. I've been to ICA, I guess the last time I was there was in the late 90s. But to be able, because also during the pandemic, my husband is French, I gained my French citizenship. So to be able to actually take my Fielding experience and go to my second home country is going to be quite rewarding.
Well, you're not going alone. I'm just saying. Right? Nobody goes to Paris without me, man. No, I think that there's, some of this persona stuff, it has a really good angle for the international communications, which is what ICA is. It doesn't tend to be psychology based, it's more communication scholars, but there are an awful lot of people in that field doing stuff that we would consider to be media psychology. They don't tend to know the theory as well as we do, but that's their loss, not ours. Holly, you were probably went to some of the APA when you were in the clinical program. I don't know that since you've joined the program, we've been able to go anywhere.
No, yeah, my only experiences have been with the clinical program because of COVID.
Right. Yeah, South by Southwest was fun while you could get a hotel room. I spoke there a couple times, but not since I couldn't get a hotel room within 5 miles of the convention center. So it'll be interesting to see what the attendance is like post-COVID. So let me just ask one final question, which is, what advice would you have for a prospective student in terms of, considering fielding, considering the field, considering the workload? I don't know, whatever you think is relevant. Scott, why don't you start?
I think that, like with anything, regardless of whether it's Fielding or a brick and mortar school that you go to, it's about what you put into it. And I believe that, for me, one of the unique things about Fielding was it was sort of that flexibility. It is a year-round program, so I was able to either dial up or dial down based on sort of other life priorities. But that continual cycle of going, term to term across the sort of trimesters added a lot to sort of it just kept me more engaged and sustained, I think, than if I would have gone to a typical 2-semester school. But I think that, one of the things that I think that a lot of people don't realize is, the accessibility, because the classes are small, that you have to work with professors in terms of, even if it's just getting clarification on an assignment, or if it's getting clarification on some theory that you're studying, or it's like, oh, I'm interested in doing this. And everyone's always extremely happy to volunteer their time. And not only do they do it, do they take that meeting with you, but they also check in on it, like, oh, whatever happened to what you were working on with binge watching? Are you still doing that? So there's just been a lot of great flexibility with that. And then, I think just the camaraderie with my peers in the program, specifically, I know Holly mentioned her cohort earlier. I was very tight with my cohort coming in my first year. We created a WhatsApp group when we got together at session. It wasn't like we had a ton of things that we had to catch up on. It was more about like spending the time with one another in person, because we were always WhatsApping each other, whether it was in regard to some certain courses that we were taking, or if it was in regard to registration that was coming up for the next term. So we were able to have those exchanges. And then, as I would come to session, I would make new friends because I would meet people in classes, and then getting to sort of, meet them face to face in person. One of the students you mentioned earlier, Jay, was a little bit further ahead, and he and I were in your brand psychology and audience engagement class together. And so I had read his work. I had, you do the introduction the first week, and so I got to know him, but I didn't meet him until like 6 months later. And turns out he lives in the Bay Area, but he also lives in Palm Springs, and so he's down here all summer. So like he and I during the pandemic got together for socially distanced walks. So I would walk on one side of the block, he would walk on the other, and we would kind of compare notes, not only about like, life in general, but also about sort of where he is in the program, where I'm at in the program, and like, swap sort of strategy. So I've gotten to meet a lot of really fascinating people, and it's like you got to put yourself out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. You have you get in we get out what you put in, and you're really good at engaging, and I'm so glad that you and Jay got to connect, because you're two of my favorite people. So Holly, what advice did you got?
So my advice would be, prior to starting a program, really go over the amount of time that you can honestly give to the program, and make sure that everybody with you in your life is on board with that. Because at least the PhD program, it's a lot of work, and you have to be dedicated and really want to finish what you start. And then my second piece of advice is piggybacks what Scott said. Really, when you start a program at Fielding, it's really important to engage with your peers and make connections and develop outside communication, because the people that you are going through the program with will help you through the program. And it is helpful when you are trying to figure out what classes to register for. You can ask them, hey, have you taken this class? Do you recommend this or that? Like, is it really hard? Can I pair it with this other class? So you get a lot of that, but then you can also talk about your experience, what it's like to be a PhD student or a master's degree student, and having other people in your life, trying to take your time. So you can troubleshoot, and it's just really helpful to have that connection. And it helps when things get hard, when life is throwing you difficult situations. It helps to have that peer group and those people you can talk to, because they help motivate you through it and help you get through times when you're just like, how do I do this? They will help you get through that. So that would be my recommendations.
Yeah, I think those bonds are really important, and I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to join me here today, and want to introduce and thank Dr. Brian Cutler, who's the director of the Media Psychology program, who's just joined us and is just joining us here. So we're excited to have you here, and thank you so much for making the time today. Erica, go ahead.
Glad to be here, and thank you for the wonderful session. Scott, Holly, you're fantastic representatives of the program, and really appreciate learning from you. And Dr. Rutledge, you are an extraordinary interviewer.
Oh, well, thanks.
And thank you all
Agreed.
for helping put this together.
And then let me just call out Erica Fischer, who's our director of admissions, and Ignacio, whose last name I can't remember. Sorry about that, Ignacio, because I can't see it on my Zoom thing. But Ignacio would be your point person to contact for any kind of admissions questions, because all that stuff is confusing to me. But if you have any questions about the program or student experience, you can reach out to me or to Holly or Scott. Ignacio can put you in contact with any one of us if you have any questions. But let me turn it back over to you, Ignacio, if there's anything anyone has to ask or that we